What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we are working on a 2018 Volvo XC90. Today on the XC90, we are going to be covering how to do a timing belt service. This will be applicable to your T5 and T6 models. This one is a T5, meaning it's just a turbo only engine, the T6 being supercharged and turboed. The only thing that's really going to change a little bit is the axis or the detensioning of the serpentine belt on that engine. If you want to check that out, be sure to check out our supercharger DIY on the V90 T6 car that we did on the channel to get that little glimpse of how to get that belt off. Otherwise, the timing belt job itself is going to be the same. In front of us, we have one of the kits available on fcpo.com ready to buy, which includes the timing belt and all the hardware needed to do this job. We have a more comprehensive kit, which features the timing tools as well, which we're going to cover in the next bit. Interval for this service is about 150,000 miles. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with doing it a little bit before. This car has just over 102,000 miles on it. Obviously, it's never been done before, so we're going to get on it, show you good people how to do it. And in order to do that, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need. For this DIY, we have a large 25-inch pry bar, 1/2-inch ratchet, 1/2-inch torque wrench, 3/8 drive torque wrench, 1/4-inch ratchet, 3/8 drive ratchet, a couple long extensions for those, some adapters. We're going to be swapping between sockets, so you'll see in a moment. We have some duplicates. But we have a few wrenches on the table. You have a 19 mil, a 15 mil, a 14 mil, and a 13 mil. We have, as far as sockets go, we have a 19, a 15, a 13, a 10, and an 8. Specialty sockets, you're going to need an M10. I have both a 1/2-inch and 3/8 drive, a T40, and a T30. I have a set of pliers as insurance, a 6 mil hex that's going to be mandatory for the tensioner, a small pin, drill bit, or something that will help lock the serpentine belt in place. This one's not super crucial. You can just pop the belt off and leave the tensioner as is. Mandatory is going to be this Volvo timing toolkit. This is CTA 7380. This is included in the comprehensive kit. If you're looking to buy everything for the first time and you don't have the toolkit, highly recommended. Whether you buy it or rent it, you're going to need it for this DIY. We have some electric tools, 1/2-inch impact, 3/8 drive, electric ratchet. Not pictured here, but needed is going to be either a engine brace, something that you can support the engine from the top side, or a free floor jack and a nice piece of wood, which is what we're going to do today to just support the engine from the bottom once we removed the lower shield. Now we know what we're working with. Let's go ahead and get started. Over at the car, we are going to start with removing the front right wheel. It also helps to turn it over to the side so you have room to work with. We can do that after the fact though. From there, we're going to be working on removing the fender liner. That's going to give us access to the hardware for the crank pulley. So 5 19mm lug bolts first. Be sure to brace the wheel on the last one, as these are bolts and there's no studs to hold on the wheel. All right, now that we have the wheel off, the main cover we're after is this smaller piece inside of here in front of the axle. But the reality is that, while there's not too much room even after the cover's off, we still have a bit of fender liner in the way. It's pretty straightforward to get this off, especially if you've seen us do the control arm DIY. We're gonna go ahead and zap out. We have a bunch of T25s all around, a couple 10mm hex, and some expanding rivets. We'll get those out and we'll pull this whole fender liner out to give everybody a better view, along with the splash shield underneath. That's where we're gonna be supporting our engine from throughout this DIY. All right, having that removed, we can now see part of our crank pulley here. So you can see we don't really have a lot of room to work with, which is going to require us to drop the engine mount, or remove the engine mount up top, but drop the engine down a little bit so that we can get to that hardware. But we will get to that in a minute. Something that we're going to need is going to be to support the engine. So let's get that bottom splash shield off, and we'll show you how we're going to do that once we have that cover off. Underneath, we have 10 T30s and 2 clips holding on this panel. So let's drop this down. I'm just going to work my way around. You can see here these clips, they just squeeze together from the front and then they release. We're going to set this to the side and then we'll show you how we're going to support the engine from underneath. Once we're ready for this, when we say we're going to be supporting the engine with our floor jack, we're going to use this piece of wood. And we're going to go just across the oil pan in full. We'll pick a good spot here. We don't want it to be uneven, something like that. And that's going to help support the engine without putting any extra stress on just one particular part of the oil pan, risking us cracking it. And then our floor jack will be underneath. And this will help us raise and lower the engine so that we can get that crank pulley off and all that good stuff. So next, let's head back up top. We have a couple covers to remove, a couple engine mounts to get to, and then we'll go from there. Up top, we're going to remove our beauty cover. 4 T40s hold that in place. We're going to zap those out with the electric ratchet. And then we'll pull this cover off and set it to the side. We're going to start by removing the 8mm bolt that holds this damper in place. I just have a tiny shallow socket on my 1/4-inch ratchet. I'm going to remove that baby first. Now we have access to the hardware that's underneath. Let's get these two 15mm bolts off first. 15mm socket, short socket for this front bolt. All right, now we have our old mounts out of the way. We're going to continue on with the rest of the engine mount here, and this is where we're going to get to the point where we're going to support our engine from underneath. But before we get to all that, we're going to mark some hardware down. That's going to help us with kind of the engine alignment when we go to put everything back together later. So I'm going to clean this up with some brake cleaner, and then I'll show you the bolt that we're going to be marking. All right, we have our engine supported. We have our floor jack with our piece of wood under the oil pan. Next on our list is going to be to zap out this 10mm bolt for our ground strap. And we'll set that baby to the side. And then we'll throw the 10mm back into the engine bracket so we don't have to go fishing for it later. This large 15mm bolt, we're gonna mark using a pin pen. You can use a Sharpie, whatever you have lying around. We can clean this up later with some brake clean. But basically what this is going to do is allow us to set the engine back in its place to where it was when we took everything apart. That way we don't bind anything up like the axles or anything like that, and everything's nice and happy. Again, engine supported. We have a 13mm bolt right here, 2 15s here, a third 15 there. We're going to zap those out, and that's going to allow us to remove this bracket so that we can move on to the engine mount down below. Beautiful. Engine's nice and supported. Now let's move on to the engine mount itself. We have 4 13mm bolts holding in this engine mount. I'm just going to crack them free with my ratchet, and then we will zap them out with the electric ratchet. Long extension to get to the bottom 2 13s. Could you probably get away without moving this? Probably, but this is going to give you so much more room to get your timing tools in place and all that, so 4 13s just to zap them out. So now with the engine mount out, this is a great time to replace it if yours is in bad shape or collapsed or possibly leaking. Sometimes these can be liquid filled. In this case, this one's in good shape. We're going to set it to the side. But now we have all the room in the world to get to our serpentine belt. So let's undo that belt tensioner and get the belt off, and then we can move on to things like the crank pulley and the timing cover and all that good stuff. Now we have our 19mm wrench, and I'm going to use a small little pin. This usually comes with like belt tensioners and stuff like that I've just been saving over time. You can use a small drill bit or a little Allen key to get through the holes in the tensioner itself, just to keep it open or undone. You don't need to lock it. You can just pop the belt off and release it, but this will make our lives a little bit easier. So let's go in with the 19, detension, and then lock it in. There's a nub here hanging off the end of our tensioner. We're going to lock our 19mm wrench onto it. Start lifting up. That's going to raise up the tensioner a bit. And traditionally, you would have this come up a bit, and there'd be another hole for you to get this pin through. In our case, that's not really happening here. So what I'm going to do is just detension this belt as much as I can and just pop it off the alternator pulley here. We have 2 T30s holding on our timing cover. We're going to zap that off now. Showing that the timing's been done, but this tab up here is broken. Typically, you just gently lift these up and then pull the cover away from the engine. So someone's either been in here, done something else, or Make sure your timing cover is nice and clean on the interior as well as the exterior before you put it back together. All right, now we have our timing cover situated. It's time to take care of the crank pulley, get that off, and then we'll set that with our timing marks down below. We'll show you what that is, and then we'll move back up top. One thing to note, again, this is where we're either gonna raise the car if we're on the lift or lower the engine if you're in the driveway or the garage floor. So our goal is to lower it, get the engine low enough so that we can access all the hardware on the crank pulley and get that off so that we can get our tool in place and just set our timing belt to where we need it so that we can do this timing belt replacement. So I'll catch you in the wheel well in just a moment. We have 4 M10 triple squares to zap out. An impact is going to be your friend. Just make sure that you have the bit well situated in the hardware. You don't want to strip these out. And we have a 15 in the middle for the crank. All right, now let's get a closer look at that crank. So giving you a quick glance at what this looks like right now, you'll see right here at the end of my pick in blue, I have highlighted the timing mark on the crankshaft. If you look at the 11 o'clock position or so, see if I can get in here without getting in your way. Right on top of here, near my pick, is another blue mark that I filled in. That's gonna be our timing mark that we need to line up the one on our crank with to the back cover. I'm going to take that tool off and I'm going to thread in the bolts on their own. These are again the old bolts. And now what I'm going to try to do is use this tool, which is our counterhold tool from when we tighten everything up, to try to spin it. I'm going to go from up top and rotate it and try to get that timing mark where we need it. All right, well, that little trick worked. A little improper use of the tool, but nonetheless, it did the job. Let me get those 4 M10s out and we'll go from there. All right, we're gonna make ourselves some marks up here just as insurance. I have one on the interior of the exhaust cam inside the timing cover there. I'm gonna make one here on the front of the intake cam and do my best to make sure that the line of sight I'm using is gonna help me keep that in line. So if I'm looking for the right or from the left, you know, I don't want it to be off. I want it to be dead on and then make my mark. We'll make one more simply from where I have to see, where I can access or see things and line them up visually. So marking it from the interior was the move for the exhaust cam. All right, now, before we go any further, we're gonna lock our cams together. So let's get that tool over here. We'll get those 2 babies locked in, and then we'll move on with the belt loosening and removal. All right, let's get these babies lined up. There's 3 dowels on the back side of this tool, and those are gonna key into the 3 dowels here on the front of our exhaust and intake cams. I'm gonna do my best to position these in a way where we have room for adjustability left and right. I don't wanna put them in fully maxed out and I can't move them around if I need to. I'm gonna put those in like that. I'll just hold that there, and then we're gonna get our backing tool. This is going to help just keep this in place, and that threads into one of the engine mount holes. So just to show you what that's looking like as we go in. And now we're going to snug these 14s up. If you're going to put a torque wrench on them, no more than 25 Newton meters. You just don't want them to spin on you for any reason when the belt is off. So I'm going to just snug them up with the 14 on my ratchet. I'm gonna use some pliers to snug this baby up a little bit so it's not loose. And I'm not looking to over crank it. Just don't want any play. All right, that's nice and locked in. Now we're gonna move on to our tensioner. Then we'll remove the idler, the belt, all that good stuff. So let's get ready for that next. With the timing marks and everything ready to rock and roll, our tool locked in. Next, we're gonna take our 13 mil, loosen up the tensioner. We'll rotate it until it takes the slack off the belt, pull the belt off, ditch the tensioner, ditch the idler, and start throwing in some new parts. I'm gonna take my 6 mil Allen key, feed that into the bottom of the tensioner, and rotate. That's gonna loosen up our belt. Let's pull the belt out. All right, let's get that old idler off. Let's get that old tensioner off. We're gonna clean up the area, get some of that old timing belt dust off, and then prep the surface, like I said, by cleaning all that timing belt dust off. And then we'll get our new idler in place, belt, tensioner, all that good stuff. Okay, let's get the rest of this tensioner out. 13 mil socket. All right, let's get this idler out of the way. 13 mil socket once again. All right, we're gonna get our new idler on first. New bolt comes with it in the kit. We're gonna feed this baby on, get the bolt started. For what it's worth, there is writing on the idler and on mainly on the bearing. So the old one has like the part number on it facing in towards the block. You can put it in, but really this can go on either way. There's no right or wrong way. So don't worry about which way it should go on. It's gonna be the same both ways. I'm gonna slide that baby on. New bolt is gonna be 10 millimeters. I'm gonna just draw it in with the electric ratchet because I'm impatient. I'm not gonna tighten it with this. And this baby gets torqued down to 24 Newton meters, again, using the 10 mil socket on the torque wrench. It's really in my way. Now we have it torqued. I'm just gonna mark the bolt so that we know it's been done. All right, next we're gonna set the tensioner in. A couple things to note. You wanna do this with the tensioner at room temp between 68 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. There's magic inside of this that helps keep this kind of aligned at where you need it to be. So just keep that in mind. If you're doing this outside in the cold or in the winter, it may affect how the tensioner is operating. We have a new bolt. We're going to set this in and just feed it in still locked up. Once we get our belt on, then we'll go ahead and show you how to tension it correctly. You'll notice there is an arrow right here where the 6 mil hex goes, and that shows you the direction of where you want to turn this when you're tensioning the belt up. So you don't want to go the other way. Try to keep it going in that direction. Another thing to note, on the back side here, there's a little hook. And that little hook is going to key in right here on the block. It's a little hard to see, but there's a big opening right here. I'll fill it in so we can see it. And in that square is where our little hook's gonna go. The little adjuster here, it's a little arrow and a little U. That you kind of want to have lined up with this notch here once everything's all said and done. We'll show you that again once we have the belt on, but just so you have a rough idea of what this should look like, that's gonna be it right there. All right, let's feed this baby on. And let's get this 13 mil started by hand. We're not going to torque this down until the very end once our belt is tensioned up. All right, we're going to draw that in a bit with the electric ratchet just to get it snugged up, but not too tight. Now we're going to feed our belt on, and there's a kind of an order on how this should go on. It's going to go around the crank first, behind the idler, over the intake, then over the exhaust, again, keeping it taut the whole time, then over the front of the tensioner. You want it to be loose or have slack on the tensioner side. That way, when you tighten everything up, it's tightening the belt correctly and not fighting it on the opposite side. If you have slack between the crank and the intake cam, you're not gonna be able to cinch that up. You're gonna rotate the crank and you're gonna be out of time. So again, crank, idler, intake cam, exhaust cam, then tensioner. You should have some slack on the tensioner side. Similar to how we took it apart, if you remember, once we loosened the tensioner, there was plenty of slack on that side and not the other side. So let's get our new belt on and go from there. All right, we're gonna get our belt on. Just be mindful as you feed it over the crank that you're not putting force on it to the point where you're gonna spin that and mess with your timing marks. And as long as you avoid that, this should be no problem. So let's get that belt on down below. Making sure that the belt is actually engaging on the grooves of the cams as well as the crank down below. I'm just going to pop underneath the wheel well and make sure that that looks good down there before I continue. But basically how this is keyed in nicely right here is what we want up top or down below. So just take your time, pop the belt off again and try again. So my good people, we are trying something here. I've been messing with this for about 15-20 minutes now. And obviously if there's something I can learn from it and tell you, I want to do that. So the trouble I'm running into is we're trying to follow the steps per Volvo, which is getting the belt on the crank first, behind the idler, onto the intake cam, onto the exhaust cam, the idea that it's all going to be taut the whole time, and then behind the tensioner, and so on and so forth. What I'm running into though is when it comes time to slip the belt off over the tensioner, I have no slack, I have no room. All the slack is on the idler side, which is what I'm trying to avoid. So what I've done here, and I'm going to test this, is I have backed the crank back one tooth in hopes that once I have everything on and I crank the crank pulley back to center or back to our marks, that is going to take up the slack on the idler side and give me that slack on the tensioner side where I need it. So we're going to give this a shot. So again, I just backed it up about one tooth. There's a little half moon on the back side of the crank pulley. And when that is in the right place, it's going to be the middle of the half moon is going to be lined up with the mark on the back of the cover. So right now I have it basically on the end, the right side of the half moon, so that when I forward it, hopefully that centers again. So we're going to give it a try and let you know if it works or not, regardless whether it does or not, so you don't bother at home. So again, we have belt in place through a crank. There's no pulley yet. Also, this just being a new belt doesn't make it any easier. That's something to keep in mind. Okay, this is as close as we've gotten. So now I have a little bit of looseness here on the idler side of things. You can see the belt's moving pretty good. Now, if my theory is correct, we're gonna retime our crank down below by rotating it back to the center, back to our marks. And technically that should give us a little bit of slack on the tensioner side, allowing us to be able to set the belt in properly and time everything properly. So, looking at our belt, this side, nice and taut. This side, nice and loose, which is what we want. Marks down for the crank, let me get the light out of your way, are perfect. They're right back in the middle. Everything up top here on the intake cam and the exhaust cam looks good. So, just to recap really quick what we did. I backed up the crank one tooth. We put the belt on, again trying to follow the order from Volvo. Once everything was kind of on, obviously we didn't have it over the tensioner just yet. We then cranked the crank pulley clockwise back forward that one tooth that we backed it up from, putting that back in time. And that gave us a slack on the tensioner side to get the belt over the tensioner and on. Now we can get that tool out of the way, we can pull the pin, and we can set our tensioner and snug that baby down to 24 Newton meters. So let's do that next. We have our belt on, it's time to tension it. We're gonna pull the pin, and you're gonna see that the little arrow that we talked about earlier is now off. So with our light in here, we want those two. Let's see if I can point at this somehow without messing up the camera. So you saw the channel that was on the block that we highlighted in blue. And then we have this little pointy guy and the one in the back. We want those two to be pretty much lined up with each other when we tension the belt using our 6mm hex and going in the direction of the arrow to do so. Once everything's looking good, it's tensioned, and that's lined up, we can lock down this 13mm to 24 Newton meters. So you can see those are coming together. The belt's getting nice and snug. All right, at this point, our belt is in, idler's in, tensioner's in, locked and set. We're gonna take our timing tool off. Then we're gonna rotate our engine over twice. That's gonna be a full 360 degrees on everything. We'll check our marks again, make sure everything lines up. We're looking for our handmade marks up top and our crank down at the bottom to be good to rock and roll. And then as long as that looks good, then we can move on to getting the crank pulley back on, and we'll show you how to use our counter hold tool, which is part of the timing kit, to get that situated. So timing tool out. Let's rotate this baby twice and see what we get. Everything still looks great after the tools came off. That's a good start. I'm gonna do the same thing we did before, which was put the 4 bolts back into the crank, the old ones, and use this part of the CTA toolkit to rotate it over twice. And then I'll see you in a moment once we're done with that. All we're doing right now is just threading in the crank bolt, the old one. Instead of doing the 4 bolts, I think we can get away with the one 15 mil bolt, and that'll make it a lot easier to rotate this engine. We want to go nice and slow. You don't want to over tighten this and then get this bolt stuck. Snap it in the crank, but obviously there's shouldn't be that much compression where that's going to happen, but just something to be mindful of if you're going to do this. All right, we're 1 stroke in. That's 180 degrees. Let's do 1 more. Initial glance, crank pulley, beautiful. Handmade timing cover up here, or timing mark to the back of the timing cover, perfect. And the one on the interior for the exhaust cam, perfect. We'll show you what that looks like, but I'm really happy with that, and then we'll go from there. Our marks are still lined up. They're still where we need them to be on the tensioner too, which is great. All right, I'm gonna zap that old 15 mil bolt out of the way. Now everything's looking good. And from there, we can get our crank pulley back in place. And we'll show you how to use the lockdown tool, all that good stuff. So let me get that old bolt out and we'll get ready for that next. Damper back in. We have this little washer here. This comes in our timing belt kit that Volvo asks you to replace. You can see it's got little ears that help key it in. So I'm gonna use a little pick to get this one just lifted up. You can see I just kind of wiggled it back. So I wonder if it's magnetic. Just using our camera here. Beautiful. Just push this baby in. Beautiful. All right, now we can throw this baby back over the crank. We have a new crank bolt and 4 new M10s, and we'll get those all started by hand. These are all started by hand. Now we're gonna go from the top side, get our tool situated, and we'll show you how to lock it down against the block. Then we'll come back down here to tighten everything up. I'm gonna go in with my tool, try to kind of get this looking as vertical as possible before we slide in the locking plate. So first, let me get this down here. And then we're gonna rotate the engine like so, and just let that hang out there. Then this guy is gonna go on our block, and we have a couple holes on this plate that'll work. So I think those 2 right there are gonna be our ticket. So let me get these bolts out of the way. Just threaded holes to help keep the hardware from being lost or misplaced while you store the tool. So now this handle is going to counter hold the crank pulley from turning. It's going to be locked in on this block up here. Now we can go back down and torque down all 5 of those bolts. So let's do that next. We're going to torque our M10 bolts first in a crisscross pattern to 20 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. I just have a massively long extension so that I can clear the brakes and everything and just get a nice bite on this. Make sure that M10 is situated all the way in. We'll do the 20 first on all of them. All right, and then we're gonna do a quarter turn on all of them. If you have a torque wrench that can do degrees, now's the time to use it. Otherwise, just a quarter turn on all the bolts is gonna do the trick. For the 15 millimeter bolt, we're gonna torque that to 110 Newton meters plus an additional 90 degrees. All right, we have our 90. Let's get that tool off and out of our way. All right, we're gonna remove our tool. Those bolts are 19 mils. I'd be lying to you if I didn't say I would just use some pliers to snug them up. You can torque these up to 80 Newton meters if you want them to be extra secure on there. But for what we're doing today, just snugging them up with some pliers worked more than fine. I'm gonna thread these bolts out and get this tool out of here. And you can pull this tool out, and these can go back in our timing toolkit. Okay, before we start throwing the timing cover back on and mounts and all that, we're gonna do one more kind of bonus while you're in there thing. And that's gonna be to replace these little caps on the end of our cam sprocket. So let me grab our Torx and we'll show you how to swap those out. These can start to leak around 150,000 miles or so, which is probably when you're gonna be doing your timing belt as well. We're just gonna bite it ahead of time and swap them out now so that the next time someone's in here, they can do them hopefully again. So let me set these to the side and I'll show you how to swap those two out. Again, a little bonus. I'm gonna take our T40, get this baby fit in here. And then we're gonna turn counterclockwise, and that's gonna cam the little cover out of the cam. Then we can just kind of twist it. Okay, well, he didn't tell me oil was gonna come out of it. All right, we have a little bit of paper towel. Pro tip, do this part of the DIY if you're doing the bonus before you do your timing belt so you don't risk getting oil on all your new components. We have a little shop towel down below. No problem. It's just about a quarter turn before I pop that baby out. Let me grab my new one. With the old one out, we have our new one set on our T40. You can see there's 3 little lines on these little covers. Those 3 lines line up with the dowel holes on the cam cover. So once you have those lined up and that O-ring is no longer visible, just like that, don't go any further, that is good to go. And with that done, we're gonna do the same thing to the exhaust cam, and now we can move on to throwing on our timing cover. We're gonna throw our timing cover back on. It's important to note that there is 2 notches on the bottom of the cover. Those are gonna key in down below on the lower timing cover, if you can call it that, or the cover behind the crank. So as we go down, and make sure those 2 engage. Sneak this cover in and then back up. Just before you put on your timing cover, if you are having a hard time doing so, and you did what I just did, which was leave the engine in the lowered position for the lower crank pulley, be sure to raise it back up so that the engine actually has room for the timing cover to go back on. So I'm gonna raise my engine back up to like normal height, and then we'll throw the cover on. Now, you can get up in here, push this cover down. That looks good down there. You don't want that cover interfering with the crank pulley. Now we can get our 2 T30s back in that secure this in place. We have one right here and one down below. Great, now with that done, let's throw our serpentine belt back on. This is gonna have to go around the AC compressor, which is way down there, around the crank, underneath our tensioner, and over the alternator. So let me see what the best way to do this is gonna be. I might have to go underneath the car for a moment and get that pulley over the AC compressor if I can't get it from up here. On the plus side, it's very straightforward how it goes. There's only 3 pulleys. Right now I'm just bending the belt. I'm not doing anything. I'm just making it a little bit thinner so I can clear the frame and the AC compressor pulley. Okay. Right now what I'm doing is working the belt around the crank pulley and the AC compressor and the underneath of the belt tensioner. I'll show you in a moment once I actually get it in place. Right now it's so off that it's not even close. Okay. All right, we have the belt around the crank. We have the belt around the AC compressor. I'm just trying to keep it even. Now I'm gonna detension the tensioner. I already pulled out the pin before. And my goal is to try to get this over the alternator, and then we can clean it up after the fact. Now it's on. Let me push this under the tensioner a little bit better. And now we just want to make sure that the belt is in between the grooves of all three pulleys. So alternator is easy, it looks good. AC compressor is down below. As long as that looks good and your crank pulley looks good, then we're good to rock and roll. We're gonna plop our engine mount pad back in place. Oh yeah. All right, let's get those 4 bolts started. All right, now we're gonna torque these down to 60 Newton meters. Now let's get our upper bracket in place. So again, these 215s are new. Those are stretch bolts. The rest of the hardware is reusable. Let me draw the 15s in a bit, then the 13, and then we'll go from there. 110 Newton meters for this first 15. Beautiful. Then we're gonna do 90 Newton meters for these two 15s, plus an additional 130 degrees. And then the 13 gets torqued down to 60 Newton meters. Beautiful. All right, I'm gonna ditch this floor jack. We're gonna get a little bit more high level with the car so we're not standing on stools or for the rest of the recording. And then we'll get this torque rod back in place. We're gonna take care of our ground strap next. Now we're gonna grab our mount, feed this baby in. Let's get this new bolt started. The mounts tend to come with these. They're not necessarily torque to yield bolts, but it is something that is included with your new mounts if you're replacing it. And we're gonna do 2/13 just to start driving the mount in towards the strut tower. We're gonna grab our longer bolt, feed that via the front. Make sure you're getting it through the actual mount. Let's torque the 2/13s down to 60 Newton meters. And then we're gonna torque the 15 down to 110 Newton meters. All right. And with that, my good people, we have the damper to put back on. It's gonna be an 8mm bolt, no more than 10 Newton meters if you're gonna put a torque wrench on that. Just gonna use the 8mm on the 1/4" ratchet and get this baby snugged up. All right. All right, and with that, our mount is fully in. The top end of our engine is secured. We can throw our beauty cover on now. Just get this baby lined up. I use the oil cap as my alignment. These are just little plastic babies. You can just give them a little push. Now, let's button up the underneath of the car. We have a belly pan to throw in. We have a fender liner and a wheel to go back on. We're gonna throw our under tray back on using the clips to help hold everything in place and line it up, which is really nice. So we have an opening on the front, we have one in the back, and then we'll pop those babies in, and then we'll sunk in the 10 T30s. They're just going into little plastic grommets, so be sure not to over tighten them. Otherwise you're gonna start stripping them out. All right, with this baby buttoned up, let's get our fender liner back in, our small cover, and then we can get the wheel on and wrap up this video. I'm gonna feed the inner cover in first. This one's always a little silly to get in and out, but in is usually easier than out. We're gonna line up the cover with the stud up top, push that baby on, make sure we're not pinching anything, and that looks good. Now we're gonna feed our fender liner in and go from there. Let's get that 10mm on while we have the light on there. And now we're just gonna work our way around and get our T25 situated back in place. All right, at this point, our fender liner is back in. All that's left to complete this puzzle is to get our wheel back on, snug it up in a crisscross pattern, drop the car down, and then torque it up to 140 Newton meters in that same crisscross pattern. Once we're done with that, my good people, that is going to conclude this timing belt DIY for today. Overall, not a horrible process, pretty intimidating at first if it's your first time doing a timing belt, but really in the grand scheme of things, a pretty straightforward one. Hopefully you learned a thing or two in this video. Hopefully you found it helpful. If so, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments or any tips or tricks that you can add to this process, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this video and you want to see more DIYs like it, consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.